What's going on? Back again, and right now I'll be sharing with you guys a list of my top 5 biggest training related lessons I've learned in 2020. So even though the year's not fully up yet, there's a lot of things I've learned that apply for my clients, for myself, and hopefully they'll apply for you guys too. So let's get into it. First things first, hands down, the biggest lesson I've learned in 2020 was the importance of maintaining a stack posture on the majority of my exercises. Now keep in mind, the key word here is majority. I'm not advising this for every lift imaginable, although you can if you want to. Now, when I talk about a stack posture, what I'm referring to is a neutral rib cage over a neutral pelvis. My coach, Connor Harris, likes to discuss this as thinking of the pelvis like a bowl of water. You don't want it to tip too far excessively forward, nor too far back. Now, keep in mind, there's also a time and place for extension. There's nothing wrong with extension, but it can become problematic when you're stuck in extension, because then your center of mass goes forward and there's a host of other problems that could happen. So if I look at the way that I was lifting a while back, on bench pressing, pull-ups, dips, back squats, skull crushers, glute ham raises, I was using a huge arch for the majority of these lifts. I was using a ton of erectors and I wasn't really able to feel my quote-unquote stack. I wasn't able to feel my hamstrings, my abs, along with my heel reference onto the ground, because I was just so far forward with my center of mass. So it was messing up my breathing mechanics, and there was a lot of other problems. I get into host of the problems in another video, but just know it wasn't optimal for maintaining my stack. And keep in mind, there's also time and place for having a huge arch, flared up rib cage. For example, if you look at a lot of powerlifters, competition, they will arch because they're trying to win. They're trying to move the most amount of weight possible. But the intelligent ones will also have a lot of variability in their training. So they'll have a lot of floor presses where the knees are above the hips. They'll have feet up benching where the knees are above the hips. They'll probably have some skull crushers where once again, it's done on the floor or the knees are above the hips. Just ways to kind of counteract a lot of that arching, so you get more tucking action. They could feel better heel reference, all that good stuff, and that'll keep them more balanced in the game longer. So that's kind of like the point of tip 1, is to maintain your stack as much as possible on the majority of your lifts. So if you look at, for example, my pull-up video that I did a while back, I was talking about why I do them with my knees above my hips or why I do them with straight legs. And the same thing could apply to dips. That relates to tip 1, because I'm trying to maintain my stack. I'm not trying to use as much erectors. We have tons of erectors, but a lot of us lack abs. We lack hamstrings. The exercises, or should I say the muscle groups that help us with that tucking action to get back to neutrality. All right, so secondly, it's the importance of taking my unilateral split stance along with my alternating lifts a lot more seriously and just prioritize them a little bit more. So basically, if we have a pyramid of exercises, you have the main lifts, you have your assistants, and you have your accessories. And a lot of people, they'll put the split stance, unilateral, or alternating lifts way at the bottom of the pyramid in the accessory section. They'll do it when it's half-assed, they'll do it at the end of the session. They won't really put much thought into it. Now the problem with this is that the human body is a lot more asymmetric than we like to think. So for example, if you look at a lot of people who do a hip shift in a squat, rarely will you see the hip shift happen on the left side, unless they may be injured on the right side. Majority of the time it will happen on the right side because they have more muscle there. They're stronger on that right side. There's a reason why majority of the planet is right-handed. We have that bigger right diaphragm if you look at the anatomy of it. So we have more muscle on the right side. We sit more into our right hip. And that's a whole nother video I could get into altogether. But just know we're more asymmetric than we think. And we'd benefit a lot more from having more unilateral lifts sprinkled into our program, or not even sprinkled in, but just incorporated and taken very seriously. And you could go way heavier on these lifts than you think. I know these are pretty exaggerated examples, but if you look at guys like Eric Bugenhagen, look at Dairyland Strength, just at the top of my head right now, they show you that you could lift way heavier on these unilateral lifts, even though they are going extremely heavy for like 1 rep maxes and stuff. In some of their videos, you could tell that there's still a good loading potential. If you look at Pete Rubish with his Bulgarian split squats, you could load these exercises very heavy. And technically, some of these lifts aren't true unilateral lifts. A true unilateral lift would be something like a pistol squat, but it's still a unilateral lift, at least in my books to a certain extent, even though the other leg is contributing to the lift. But nonetheless, you could still load these exercises heavy. They'd benefit your training. They'd add more what's called variability, but they'd also help balance out from side to side. Now, especially if, for example, let's say you're doing a Bulgarian split squat and you start off with the left leg and you can only do, let's say, 7 reps at 225, but on the right side, you could do 12 reps at 225. This tells you there's a clear muscular imbalance or strength imbalance, and you need to resolve that, because most likely what's going to happen is when you do your squats, you do your deadlifts, you're going to shift more into that right side. You want to get it as balanced as possible. All right, so as far as prioritizing is concerned, there's nothing necessarily wrong with taking a lift like a split stance trap bar deadlift and making it a main lower body exercise, at least temporarily, for certain phases of the year, because what this is going to do is going to help balance out from side to side. It's great for the mid stance phase of the gait cycle, which is great for athletics, and there's just a ton of other benefits as far as even carrying over to some of your bilateral lifts. So for example, if you have, let's say, a hip shift in your squat, you may notice that if you do a mini phase of split stance exercises, that when you go back to your squat, that hip shift may actually be resolved, because now you're a lot stronger on that left side and you'll be able to shift back into it better. So as opposed to just relying on the right side that's a lot stronger, you have more balance in your training and you're actually going heavier on these split stance exercises. So like I mentioned before, the split stance style exercises are considered more unilateral, at least in my opinion. To some, they're considered bilateral, but I still categorize them more as a heavy style of unilateral lifts, especially if the intention is there, especially if you have 90% of the weight on the working leg and the other 10% is just for the supporting leg. And then you have, for example, your unilateral lifts, the true ones. You could have like some pistol squats. You could have them with their reach where you hold onto a band or something. You could have some RDLs where the other leg is going back and it's in the air. So there's different purposes for different unilateral lifts. And I could talk about this in another video, but not every single unilateral lift is meant to be done extremely heavy either. But as far as the split stance lifts, you could definitely go heavy on those. And the other category is the alternating lifts. So alternating lifts are very important, especially for the upper body, because if you want to have a mobile rib cage, which is important for the gait cycle, you want to move very well, it's important to have some alternating lifts in there. So a good example of this would be when you're doing your chest supported rows, you could just alternate with some dumbbells. Or when you're doing some incline presses, you could do alternation on that as well. You don't have to do it on every single dumbbell exercise, but you could have these sprinkled in to have that more mobile rib cage. Get a nice reach in, and that'll activate the serratus, and this is great for shoulder health as well. Also, another added benefit of the alternating lifts is that you don't have to do 2 sets. You can get it done in 1 set. So if you're doing, let's say, a Zercher reverse lunges, you can do 10 reps per one leg, 10 reps for the other leg, just alternate from side to side, and that's your set right there. You just count to 20, and you don't have to do 2 sets technically. Now, just to summarize this number 2 post, I think that unilateral lifts, or should I say split stance exercises, can take more priority in your training. They don't have to be an accessory lift. They could actually be an assistance lift for some of your programs. But then again, it all depends on context. It all depends on the individual, depends on their weaknesses and what needs to be addressed. So thirdly, it's the importance of prioritizing conditioning a lot more. So if you rewind to the earlier days on this channel, I was already talking about conditioning very early on. And I always did conditioning to a certain extent, but not as the same extent as I'm doing right now. So right now I'm doing it 4 times a week. I'll end each session with 1 conditioning exercise, and I'll have the 4th day at the end of the week where it's just dedicated conditioning work. A lot of carries, a lot of throws, kettlebell work, some jumps in there, and just, some hamstring work, landmine stuff. It's gonna change from cycle to cycle, but overall, I'm benefiting a lot inside and outside the gym from conditioning. The work capacity is there, getting more fit, feeling better, way less sluggish. And if you want to see more benefits of conditioning, I definitely recommend you check out my conditioning playlist. You're really going to know the ins and outs of the programming, benefits, exercises, workout examples of conditioning, and that's going to help you out. So fourthly, it's the importance of taking your hamstring training more seriously, upping the frequency, understanding why they're so important to begin with, and making certain tweaks to make your hamstring training a lot more bang for your buck. So in a day and age where everyone cares so much about the glutes, and glutes obviously are important, unfortunately a lot of us are stuck in extension. A lot of lifters have their center of mass going way forward where it's on their toes, flared rib cages, they can barely feel their heels. We need more exercises which require what's called heel reference, because this is important for the gait cycle, this is important for helping us maintain our stack and shifting our center of mass a little bit more back, which is why I talk a lot about doing lifts backwards and reverse, like reverse sled drags, reverse lunges, and you could check that out in my conditioning video. But the benefits of having stronger hamstrings is so essential, especially for performance. If you want to be able to sprint faster, you want to be able to jump higher, if you want healthier knees, but also if you want to maintain your stack, if you want to get that center of mass more back, if you want to be able to tuck your pelvis, a strong pair of hamstrings with some strong abs is going to help you do that. So if you want to get more bang for your buck out of your hamstring training, You want to have what's called heel reference, like I just mentioned, where you want to do what's called glute ham raises with the feet against the wall, if you have access to that. You want to have glute ham sliders. You could do val slides. You want to do hamstring exercises which require heel reference, because this is important for heel strike, which is important for the gait cycle for when your heel strikes onto the ground, which is important for athletics. So as far as your training is concerned, you could spread out your hamstring training every day. So you could have RDLs one day, split stance RDLs another day, glute ham raises another day, and you could maybe have a single leg hamstring curl on a val slide, something like that on another day. So you really have variability, you have frequency, and once your hamstrings are a lot stronger on the right exercise, you're gonna feel like $1 million. Your knees are gonna feel way better, your performance is gonna go through the roof, and your lifts are gonna also go up as well. Okay, so last thing that's coming more from a coaching style lesson that I've learned is that verbal cues are not always gonna cut it. That's why you have to have more tools in your toolbox. And some of these tools could be references, restrictions, along with other things like reaching. So if you guys wanna have more details on these concepts I'm talking about, you could check out my 3 cues video, or you could check out my teaching the RDL video where I apply some of these concepts into greater detail. So just for the sake of this video, a good example of this would be if you're telling a client to feel their heels, to squish the floor with the heels, and it's just not working, it's not really sticking with the client, you could try more tactile / reference style cues where you could grab a band on each hand, put it under each heel, you step away, and you make them squish the band. And you tell them squish the band during the whole duration of the set, and this will help them feel the heels a lot more. And if the heel starts to rise, the band just gonna snap back. And that's just one way among many of teaching a lifter how to really feel their heels throughout the duration of a lift. Or if we're talking about more restriction style cues, this could be with my RDL video where I talk about alternatives of the vert pull. So for example, if you're teaching an RDL and a lifter is stuck doing a conventional deadlift, they bend their knees way too much, you could have a bench in back of their calves, not too far, not too close, and this will help them, give them a new restriction where they can't bend the knees too much, so they have to load the hamstrings with that hip hinge. And this could also be applied to a wall as well. There's tons of different tools in the toolbox, and I'm just so happy and grateful I was in touch with certain coaches to help teach me certain things on how to get my point across better. And if certain things didn't work, I would always have a plan B in my head of what would work. So that pretty much wraps up my top 5 biggest lessons I've learned in 2020. Obviously the year's not done yet. There's still certain things I'm gonna learn, and I will go into some of these categories into greater detail if you guys want me to in the comment section below. Overall, I wanna know, what are the top 5 biggest lessons you've learned in 2020 regarding training? So let me know in the comment section below. Hope you got some value out of today's episode, and I'll be seeing you guys next time.